Starter sets. They're a great way to get introduced to the hobby of scale modelling. After all, you get everything that you need inside of them. Well, kind of. At the very least, you should get the parts, some glue, some paints and a brush. But that is just about enough to get started with. Hello everyone, I'm Matt, this is Model Minute, and join me today as I get onto the workbench with the Airfix 1/72 scale Tiger 1. This is a starter set that I've had in the stash since its release a few years ago, and I've been meaning to make this video for a few years, but it's finally here. So join me as I get stuck inside the box of this kit, see what it's like, and complete this video with a review. Let's get into it. So as mentioned, this is a kit that I've had in the stash for a couple of years, and I've been meaning to do a back to basics kind of build with it. Unfortunately, because it is a little bit older now, it's a 2020 release, which I don't think we actually saw until 2021. If you check my unboxing video on this one, you'll see that some of the paints weren't particularly usable. As a result, I've had to use some alternatives, but I will put a full list of all the kinds of paints and cements that I've used during this build on the screen now, which, if you've had the same problem as me, might give an alternative idea for some suitable replacements. I'm going to break this build down into two different sections. The first part will be where I build the kit a bit like a starter set to a very basic standard. Then the second part will be where I just add a few extra bits and pieces to make it look a little bit better, which I think might be the next steps that a beginner could make with this kind of model. So as is normal with most of my builds, I'm going to be cutting away the parts from the sprue using my side cutters. Any bits of flash or leftover plastic can then be sanded down. As this tooling is not particularly old, and this was actually the first release of it, there isn't anything really in the way of flash on this kit. This kit does come with a little tube of Humbrol poly cement, so I thought it would be a good idea to use this during this build. You can apply it straight out of the tube as I'm doing here to assemble the lower half of the hull. The instructions actually tell you where to put your cement as well, which is quite handy. For finer details though, you might need to apply the cement using a cocktail stick or something else like that. So I'm just going to progress through the build here, assembling the kit as per the instructions, building up the sides of the hull, adding the front armour, and the rear piece as well. The top of the hull can then be added as well, and everything is fitting together relatively nicely. This kit is definitely an improvement of the vintage classics Tiger 1 which I built last year. With the side skirts now added onto the kit as well, I turned my attention to the rear of the tank and started adding the various smaller details which need to be glued into the little holes here. These include things such as the engine exhaust pipes and other bits and pieces which would have been stowed on the side. This kit does seem to feature quite a few extra details compared to the Tiger 1 I built previously, and no doubt address the shortcomings that that kit had. I then turn my attention to the front of the tank and glue into place the hull machine gun and the viewport for the driver. Now it's time to move on to the turret. I assemble the various pieces which make up the body of the turret. So the turret is assembled in a rather intuitive way, and if you're careful with your placement of the glue, you could have a turret which traverses freely and the barrel be able to be moved up and down. Speaking of the barrel, this comes in a couple of parts which need to be glued together, but I think the way they've done this is quite good, as the way it's been moulded means that you don't actually have to drill out the barrel to make it look a bit better. The tracks in this one are rather simple, they just come as two pieces which need to be glued together. But because they are glued together in this way, there is a bit of a seam down the length of the track. And now it's time to prime. Got it on a t-shirt. Someone said I should get it on a t-shirt, so I have. So to prime this kit, I'm just going to be using a cheap rattle can primer which I found in a home hardware shop, and I decided to do this outside as it was a nice day. You can see that the main body of the tank, the tracks and the turret have not yet been joined together. I'll spray them with this paint and then assembled them later. A couple of thin layers was applied just to cover all of the yellowy plastic and provide a good base for the next layer of paint. If you didn't want to, you wouldn't have to paint this kit, as it does kind of come moulded in the correct colour already. So that would be an option to you if you were a beginner. I've decided to paint this kit using Vallejo Medium Ochre. As mentioned previously, some of my paints were not particularly usable. Partly due to the fact that they've been sitting in the stash for nearly 5 years, but also there was that issue with the Humbrol pot design where they were drying out. I could of course contacted Airfix Spares for a replacement, but I think that this paint will do as I have it in my stash. I would apply a couple of thin coats to this, and a little drop of water would help with the flow of the paint. A medium-sized brush was used to work this into all the surface details and paint it onto all the various elements of the tank. The next paint to be used was some Vallejo Black, and this was carefully applied using a finer brush to the rims of the wheels. So because this is a starter set, the wheels and tracks all come moulded together. I do think that there is a more tricky version of this kit out there which has these elements separately, which might make it a bit easier to paint. But this was actually quite fiddly to do. So if I was a beginner, I probably would just skip this step and move on. This did take a lot of patience, and I had to be very careful not to get paint in the wrong places. With that done, gunmetal grey was then used as the base colour on the tracks themselves. If you apply your paint a little bit heavily down the centre seam there, it might be able to help hide the fact that this has been joined in that place. So that's something I tried to make sure I did, hiding the kind of way that this track was assembled. I would also pick out the hull machine gun and some of the smaller details on the top of the hull, such as the shovels and I believe they're like jacks and things, with this same gunmetal colour. And now it's time to move on to the decals. So you get one reasonably small sheet of decals in this kit, so this isn't going to be a very long step. These decals are printed by Cartograph and are to a very high quality. The entire decal sheet was dipped into warm water to help release the transfers from the backing paper. Humbrol Decal Fix will be my setting solution of choice in this build, and this decal fix was brushed onto the relevant areas where the decals were going to go. This should help soften them onto the surface and hopefully avoid leaving any silvering of the decal film. Decal Fix does leave a slightly glossy finish, so I might have to address that in a bit. The decals were then carefully slid off the backing paper, positioned onto the model, and then some more Decal Fix was brushed over the top to further enhance the softened effect and make them appear as though they were painted on. Application of the decals was a relatively straightforward step, and I didn't really encounter any problems with it. With the decals now applied and dry, the next step was to paint on some clear matte varnish. I painted this onto the entire tank assembly. What this should do for the transfers though is dull down any glossiness and also protect them from any subsequent work I may do. It acts a little bit like an extra layer of glue, just to keep them on the surface of the tank. I do find that this Humbrol Clear Matte isn't quite as matte as I would like it, but it will do the job for this build. With that done, it was time to add the tracks to the sides of the hull. Again, some polycement was applied to the relevant places, and then they were carefully positioned. I had to make sure that the glue didn't go in the wrong places, so that it didn't ruin any of that paintwork I've applied. I could then pop into place the turret, but this was not glued on, as it should be able to freely rotate. And that is pretty much that for the first part of this video. So as mentioned, this is the kind of stage that the instructions kind of lead you to, and as a starter set I think is fairly kind of reasonable to get to. All we've done here is assembled the model and painted and applied the decals. I think though, I could probably take this a little bit further and add some further weathering and other effects to make it look just a little bit better. So the first thing I'm going to do is use some of this Humbrol Rust Wash Enamel. This was applied straight out of the bottle onto the tracks and wheels. I wanted to apply this in a certain kind of way that would make it look like it was a bit dirty. I'd also apply this to the areas of the engine exhausts and all those little vents and things, as well as a few other little areas where perhaps paint has chipped and things have become a bit rusty. Next, some of that Vallejo acrylic I used earlier was thinned down with a little bit of water, and I'm making a dark wash. This was painted onto all of the areas of the tank to try and add some shade, dirt and grime. I would paint this on and manipulate it so that all those recessed details would be highlighted and would make it look just a little bit more dirty. Next, this Humbrol No. 1 grey primer was applied to my paintbrush and then all of the paint removed. Well, all of it up until the point that it felt dry, because I'm going to do some dry brushing. So dry brushing is a technique where there is effectively paint residue on your paintbrush, and this is just brushed over the entire model. All of the raised areas and details will pick up this paint, whereas the main surfaces won't. This adds a kind of highlight. And I worked on this in a kind of way to make the high or lit up areas of the tank look a little bit more vibrant, and the lower side areas not so much. And now for a product I've not really tried much of, is the Green Stuff World Dark Brown Mud. This was a texture paint that was actually bought for me by my wife as a gift a year or so ago, and I thought that this would be the perfect time to try it out. So I applied this to all of the lower areas of the tank around the tracks, the running gear, the side skirts and the mud flaps. Anywhere that I thought realistically may have accumulated some mud whilst this tank was being used. It's a relatively easy product to use, and once painted on to the relevant areas, I left it to dry. Next, I just want to add an extra detail, and for this I need some stretched sprue. So these are little bits of plastic which were included in the kit from the framework or the sprues, and all I've done is heated them up and stretched them out into a fine wire. This fine wire was then cut to a suitable length, and with a little paint scraped away from the relevant place on the turret of the tank, I then glued a piece of this stretched sprue onto the top. What this is going to do is represent an aerial. It did look a little long, so I cut it to a more typical length from images that I'd seen online, and then gave it a coat of the gunmetal paint I've used previously. This aerial mast is perhaps a little bit thick, but I think for an impression it'll do the job. I then rejoined the turret onto the hull, and I think that will do for this build. And there we have it. That's my second part of this build now complete. So I've gone from a pretty much out of the box basics kind of build to adding a few little extra improvements, which I think do kind of improve the look of this kit. This is objectively a pretty easy to build model, but I think the main area that I struggled with was those tracks. Not in the assembly of them, because they only come in two halves, but I've been looking through my book where I keep a log of everything that I do, and it says here that it was well designed, but I wasn't a fan of the tracks because they were just so difficult to paint. As a beginner, having to paint the rims and also sort of the tracks themselves and not get those paints on the yellow paint that was applied, I feel that's going to be a bit of a challenge. I have also built the Sherman, which we'll look at in another video, and I found the tracks on that one to be much easier to paint. One of the other notes I've written down here is that the kit is fairly simple, the details are reasonable, but I've put like it was a bit, it was a fine kit to build, but it didn't really spark as much joy as the Sherman that I did sort of at the same time as this one. So talking about the kit then, we know that this is a 2020 tooling, so it's sort of one of the new kind of Airfix kits in their special starter set range. It was designed specifically to be an easy to assemble model kit as part of this new starter set range that they introduced at that time. I don't think that we saw this kit until 2021 though, because of events that were happening in the world at the time. At the time when I bought this in 2021, I paid £10.99 for it, but at the moment when I'm making this video on the website, it's available for £11.99. As with most things, prices have crept up recently. For that price, I don't think it's too terrible. You're getting a reasonably new moulded kit, you are getting a selection of paints, a brush and some cement to go along with it. So you're getting pretty much everything you kind of need to get started in the box. However, as mentioned, I did have an issue with some of the paints being dry in my sample, but if I was really concerned about that, I would be contacting the Airfix spares department to get a replacement sent out to me, or alternatively returning it to the place where I bought it and seeing if I can get a replacement. There is another version of this kit that's available out there, and that comes with more parts. So they've actually designed extra details and also the tracks to be Lincoln length. So there is another version of this kit out there with an extra sprue or two, which makes a slightly more advanced version of the model. And I believe that that one retails for the same price, but it does come with a different paint scheme and, as mentioned, has extra parts. So not too terrible value for money. As a simple kit though to build and an introduction to scale modelling, I don't think the £11.99 is too out of line with other kits of this kind of quality. However, I would always try and recommend if you shop around to see if you can get the best deal on them. But yeah, so this was a model and a video, which was a long time coming. But it's finally here now. Let me know what you think of my build down in the comments below, and any other suggestions that you might have for builds on the channel. As always, a quick shout out to my Model Club members for the extra support they give the channel. A massive thanks to these guys on screen for their extra support. I would like to take this moment to welcome our latest member to the club, Chris Clark. Thanks for joining us. If you'd like to join the people on screen or support the channel in other ways, take a look at the information below the video. The best way to support this channel for free though is by subscribing with notifications turned on so you never miss a modelling upload. Finally though, last thing to say is a massive thank you to you for watching this one, and from me here on the workbench, I'll see you again soon. Tiger 1. Airfix Tiger 1. Oh, that was too loud that time. I totally forgot. It's been a while since I used my clapperboard and I forgot how loud it gets. But hopefully it's synced. Starter sets. They are a great way. No. Yeah, they are a great way to get started with the hobby, but Airfix Tiger 1, take 2. Not so loud. I'll get there. It's right next to me here. There's a plane flying over. Why do planes fly over when I'm recording videos? Well, all of it up until the point that it felt dry, because I'm going to do some dry brushing.